So today I wanted to talk about my Matchless HC-30. Now this is a really cool amp, and it was actually a dream amp of mine for many years. But only recently have I been thinking about selling it. There's a lot of reasons why I think about selling it. It's a big amp. It's something that I don't really want to drag around all the time. It's also because the Kemper profiler does a really good matchless sound, and it's something that I just kind of wonder if I should have if I'm getting everything I need from the Kemper. I know that's a crazy thought. I think a lot of people end up going from the Kemper to something like a matchless, but it was in trying to put a price or value on the amp that I was reminded what a cool amp it really is. So this is an HC-30R, which comes from the C30 line of amps that Matchless makes, and it was one of the first designs that Mark Sampson and Rick Perota designed when they started the company Matchless back in the 90s. Now, it's pretty common knowledge that these C30 amps were based on Vox AC-30s, specifically older Vox AC-30s. And it was actually Rick Perota that made the original design pitch, saying that he wanted an AC-30 that just wouldn't break. So that's what we ended up getting. We got this amp called a Matchless DC-30, and it's a combo amp, a 2-speaker amp, 30 watts, EL84s, greenback speaker. It's basically a boutique Vox. And with this DC-30 came the SC-30, which is the single speaker version, as well as the HC-30, which is what I have, which is a head and an optional cabinet. Now I have the HC-30R, which means that it includes a spring reverb. So I mentioned earlier that these are EL84 style amps. They have EL84 power tubes, giving them enough power to put out a very loud 30 watts. The C30 line of Matchless amps has kind of earned its reputation as being the king of EL84 style amps, which is cool because as a 2-channel amp, I really feel like the first channel gets a really good plexi style sound, and the second channel amp gets that bright, chimey Vox sound. Now this is mainly because of the variance in tubes in the first and second channel. The first channel has 12AX7s, and the second channel has a tube known as an EF86. The EF86 has that really gainy sound, in addition to having a 6-way switch that can change between different capacitors to shape the tone a little bit better. There's also a really kind of odd inclusion in a knob that is labeled as cut, and that actually reduces the high frequencies to a very small degree, but it can actually be very helpful in shaping that top end, as these amps generally tend to be a little bit more trebly. The first channel is supposed to be based on an early Vox, kind of that top boost sound that you'd get from an AC-30 or an AC-15. I actually really like the first channel on my Matchless. I tend to use it more often than not. All of that, plus the fact that this amp is so incredibly well built, point-to-point wiring, shock-mounted tubes, I feel like you could drop it and it would be totally fine. I've had this Matchless for coming up on 2 years now, and it's just been incredible to have, albeit I just don't play it as much as I once did. I've only brought it out to 1 gig, and it was fun, but it was just a lot. The Matchless head that I own is a 2019, but this is in sharp difference to the cabinet that I own, which I've actually owned for about 5 years now. The cabinet is a 1995, which puts it well within what they would call the Sampson era of Matchless amps. This is when Mark Sampson, who was one of the original designers of Matchless, was building these amps, and supposedly he built them better than what you would get now. I don't know if I buy that. I don't think the Matchless being Sampson era instills any more tone quality on the amp, whatever. I do know it affects the collector's value of the amp though, and that in addition to the fact that this cabinet is the vintage shower curtain Tolex apparently makes it also kind of rare and collectible, from what I've learned. I mentioned I bought this about 5 years ago. I really needed a 212 cabinet, and I was just looking around and this came up on Craigslist. I didn't realize at the time that I bought it that the speakers had been switched out. So they're Vox branded greenbacks in there. But now I've been in contact with Matchless, and I've been asking them about their mismatched original speakers. So nowadays, when you buy a Matchless 212, you get 2 speakers in that cabinet. One of them is a Matchless branded greenback, and the other one is a Matchless branded G12H. And they don't actually tell you what they do to these speakers. Maybe they just break them in a little bit better. But from what I've heard, they sound incredible, and that difference in wattage because one is a 25 watt speaker and one's a 30 watt speaker, apparently like breaks up in a different way. One is a little bit more saturated than the other, so you start to get a little bit of a stereo effect. It's definitely something I'm looking forward to checking out. But ultimately this amp, it's really the end-all be-all of EL84 amps for me. As someone who really likes the 6v6, 6L6 sound, I probably am not looking towards Marshall Plexis or even like Vox AC-30s I'm not as much into. I'm really surprised at how many people actually play Matchless C30 amps too. People like Walter Becker from Steely Dan used one, Billy Gibbons has one, as does Neil Young and Bob Dylan, Bruce Springsteen, Dave Matthews, Elvis Costello, James Valentine from Maroon 5, Jeff Lynne, the lead singer of ELO, kind of serious guitar players like Mike Landau and Brent Mason has one. Two old teachers of mine, Paul Jackson Jr. as well as Pat Kelly, really got me into Matchless as well. And the king of AC-30s himself, Brian May, actually uses a Matchless DC-30 on occasion. I think reason being that it's been used so much for live recording and for studio work means that its versatility and just total ownership of that EL84 sound makes it just a studio staple and a great amp to have in any guitar player's arsenal. So hey, thanks so much for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, please leave me a like. The backing track you heard during this video is available on my Patreon to jam over. I'll see you guys in the next one.